How do you feel about your own country? Does that word pride immediately pop into your head? Maybe, during holidays or big international events.
Yeah, or maybe it's something quieter for some people, more complex.
Or even a bit reserved, perhaps. Is that feeling, that connection, is it the same everywhere? Or does it look, well, completely different depending on where you are?
It's a really fundamental question, isn't it? How we connect to this big thing called our nation.
Right.
And like you said, it's shaped by so much history, culture, shared experiences, even how a country sort of sees itself on the world stage.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We've been looking at quite a few sources based on these big international surveys.
The kind that ask people all over the globe about, national identity, pride, even things like willingness to defend their country.
So our mission for this deep dive is to take those numbers, those stats, and really go a bit deeper.
Yeah, beyond just the rankings, we want to unpack what these surveys show about the sort of global map of national feeling.
Understand which countries report the highest levels of pride or willingness to defend.
And which ones are, well, at the other end. But more importantly, why? What are the stories behind those numbers?
Exactly. It's not just a league table. It's about getting a feel for the incredibly diverse reasons. The cultural factors, the historical moments.
We'll explore those places where national feeling seems very overt, very intense.
And then we'll look at countries where maybe expressing national pride is less common or less traditional, perhaps complicated by history or just different cultural norms.
It's really crucial to state this up front. Seeing lower numbers for overt patriotism in these surveys, it absolutely does not mean people dislike their country.
Right. It doesn't mean they lack connection.
No, not at all. It often points to different cultural values,
Yeah.
maybe complex historical baggage, or perhaps a focus on identities beyond just the national one. Or even just a different way of defining that connection. It's not a simple more is better thing.
Exactly. It's about different ways of expressing national identity. So think of these survey results as like clues, conversation starters.
Little threads we can follow to get to the why.
So I'll guide us through some of the findings that really stood out from the sources, the numbers and trends that make you pause.
And I'll jump in to help connect those dots, look at the context, and maybe draw out some insights about the forces shaping these feelings worldwide. This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
So let's begin with the countries that consistently show up near the very top in these global surveys. When they're asked about national pride or willingness to defend their country.
These are places where that connection seems really strong, very visible, and deeply felt by a huge chunk of the population. The numbers are pretty compelling.
Yeah, they really are. When we look at the data, one country often appears right near the top, especially for that willingness to defend measure, Pakistan. One source cited a figure, 96% of people there saying they defend their country in a war. That's remarkable.
96%. That is profoundly high.
And another source mentioned around 90% feeling emotionally connected or proud.
So what do the sources suggest is driving that?
Oh.
A key factor seems to be a very strong link between religious and national identity. For many, being Pakistani and being Muslim are deeply intertwined. And this is often reinforced, through education, through media.
So that identity connection is central.
Exactly. And then there's a significant factor of perceived external threats, particularly the historical tensions with neighboring India.
Right. That sense of needing to be unified against a potential danger.
Precisely. It tends to forge a powerful sense of solidarity. Plus, there's often a deep emotional tie to the military and the whole story of independence, the creation of Pakistan.
Fascinating how that external pressure can really solidify things internally. Okay, moving along. Another country with extremely high reported willingness to fight.
Morocco,
yeah. One survey, I think it was Wingallop, put them at 94% willing to defend, almost identical to Pakistan's number. Wow. So similar levels of feeling, but what are the drivers cited for Morocco? Are they different?
They are different in specifics, but just as powerful, it seems. A long history of independence is key, and crucially, the monarchy.
The king.
Yes, the king is widely seen as a really important unifying symbol for the nation, providing continuity. There's also strong pride in Morocco's rich cultural mix, the Islamic and Arab Berber heritage.
Okay.
And a bit like the Pakistan-India dynamic, the ongoing issue around territorial unity, specifically concerning Western Sahara, is often noted as something that boosts national solidarity.
Interesting. So different kinds of unifying forces, a monarch maybe founding ideals elsewhere, can both lead to this really intense national feeling. Speaking of founding ideals, Next up, the United States.
Right. The U.S. consistently scores high on national pride, typically somewhere between, say, 70 and 85% expressing pride in being American.
Still very high numbers.
Definitely. Although there's an interesting nuance mentioned in some sources. The percentage saying they are extremely proud seems to have dropped quite a bit in recent years, down to around 39% in some polls.
Huh. That distinction between proud and extremely proud is really telling, isn't it? Suggests maybe a shift in the intensity of the feeling, even if general pride remains high.
It could suggest that. As for the high overall numbers, the sources often point to the core founding ideals. Freedom, democracy, individual rights, concepts that resonate deeply for many.
Those foundational principles.
Yeah. And also the country's historical role as a global power, its military strength. Big national holidays like the 4th of July are obviously huge cultural moments.
Reinforcing that identity.
And the idea of American exceptionalism is often part of the narrative in education and media, too.
Okay, that makes sense. Number 4 on this list, India.
India also scores very, very high, consistently above 80%, often even over 90% in national pride surveys.
Which is pretty remarkable when you think about the sheer scale and diversity of India. So many languages, cultures, religions.
It really is. How is that fostered? Well, sources point to its incredible history, one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. That provides a deep well of shared heritage, even amidst the diversity.
That ancient history is a powerful unifier.
Definitely. And people express pride in its status as the world's largest democracy, its economic and tech growth, its rising global influence.
A sense of progress, too.
Yes. And like the others on this list, that national pride gets actively reinforced. Through politics, through its massive film industry, Bollywood, and big national festivals.
History, democracy, culture, growth.
Quite a mix. Okay, rounding out this top group, the Philippines.
The Philippines also shows very high willingness to defend stats, often above 85%.
And the story behind that?
A key factor mentioned is a strong national identity that was really forged through resisting colonization over centuries.
Right, that shared history of struggle.
Exactly. There's also significant pride in democratic values, particularly the history of people power movements. Religious and cultural unity play a role, too.
And there seems to be high regard for Filipino resilience, facing challenges, natural disasters, and also pride in the contributions of the huge number of Filipinos working overseas.
Okay, so looking across these 5, Pakistan, Morocco, U.S., India, Philippines, are there common themes emerging here about why pride is so high?
Well, yeah, I think so. Even with their unique stories, what stands out is the power of a strong, shared narrative, often rooted in history, independence struggles, ancient roots, founding ideals.
That shared story seems key.
Definitely. And external factors like perceived threats or territorial disputes seem to powerfully boost that internal solidarity.
Right.
And crucially, this strong sense of identity isn't just there. It's often actively cultivated, reinforced through culture, education, political messages. It's built and maintained.
It feels like in these places, national identity is a really active, very present part of people's lives, often tied to these big collective experiences or symbols.
That seems fair to say.
Okay, now let's pivot. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum revealed by these surveys, the countries showing lower levels of what we might call overt traditional patriotism.
Right. And again, that nuance is just so important here. Lower numbers don't mean lack of affection.
No.
It often reflects cultures that express connection differently. Maybe skepticism towards nationalism because of history, or a preference for other identities, regional, maybe global. It's just a different way of looking at national belonging.
Exactly. It's about how it's expressed and prioritized, not if it exists. So, according to the surveys, one country often on this lower end is Japan.
Yes, surveys like the World Values Survey often find around, say, 45% of Japanese people saying they're very proud to be Japanese. That's quite a bit lower than the countries we just talked about.
Yeah, a significant difference. What are the factors contributing to that more reserved expression in Japan?
Well, sources highlight a few things. Cultural modesty is apparently quite significant in Japanese culture. Expressing strong pride, whether it's personal or national, can sometimes be seen as, well, immodest or even arrogant.
Ah, a cultural norm against overt displays.
Seems like it. Then there's the very powerful post-World War II pacifist mindset. A degree of skepticism towards militarism or strong nationalistic displays directly linked to that history.
Understandable.
And also, there's mention that younger generations might be more globalized, maybe less invested in traditional forms of national identity.
So cultural norms and recent history are big factors there. Okay, next, Germany.
Germany also historically shows lower levels of overt patriotism in surveys, often in the range of 30% to 50% reporting being very proud.
And the historical context there is, well, it's huge.
It's impossible to ignore. The guilt and the intense historical awareness around World War II and the Nazi era are profound influences.
Right.
That history has led to a deep skepticism towards anything resembling aggressive nationalism or overt patriotic symbols. Instead, you often see a strong emphasis on European identity.
Prioritizing Europe over just Germany.
Sometimes, yes. Or alongside it. And crucially, instead of traditional national pride, sources suggest Germans often express civic pride.
Civic pride. What does that mean exactly?
Pride in their democratic institutions, their social systems, the rule of law, economic stability. It's pride in how the country works, rather than just symbols.
That's a really fascinating distinction. Pride in structures over symbols. Okay, following Germany. South Korea.
South Korea is interesting. There's often strong ethnic pride, a sense of shared Korean identity, but overt national pride focused on the state itself. Sometimes polls lower, maybe around 30% to 40%, saying very proud.
So why that difference between ethnic pride and pride in the state, and the lower numbers for state pride?
The sources suggest things like internal political divisions, maybe some disillusionment with the political system.
Okay.
There's also talk of a certain detachment or cynicism among younger people, sometimes linked to social pressures, inequality, job prospects, things like that.
So internal challenges affecting national feeling.
Possibly. And this is key. While pride in the state might be lower, there's often immense pride in South Korea's cultural output. K-pop, films, technology.
Yeah, the cultural exports are huge.
Exactly. But that pride isn't always directed towards the national institutions themselves, more toward the creativity and success of the Korean people.
Another important distinction, pride in cultural products versus the political system. Next up, France.
France also shows somewhat mixed results. Surveys on the very proud level often fall in that similar 30% to 40% range.
What's the dynamic in France leading to those kinds of numbers?
The sources often highlight a strong emphasis on individual rights and liberties. That's sometimes prioritized over unquestioning loyalty to the state.
The individual versus the state.
In a sense, yes. There's also a very ingrained culture of critical public discourse. Skepticism towards government, towards authority, questioning things is almost a national pastime.
Right, that critical spirit.
Yeah. Plus, high levels of secularism and strong regional identities can sometimes dilute a single overt sense of national unity.
Okay, makes sense. And finally, the Netherlands.
The Netherlands is another country where those traditional expressions of patriotism tend to poll relatively low, according to these sources.
And what does that reflect about Dutch society?
It's often described as very liberal, very individualistic, globally oriented. There's strong support for multiculturalism, a comfort with an international outlook. National pride isn't absent, but it's usually expressed much more subtly.
How so?
Through shared social values, maybe tolerance, equality, not so much through flag-waving or nationalistic slogans. It's more like a quiet confidence in their way of life, their societal model, rather than overt chest-beating.
A different style of pride, then.
Exactly. So looking across these countries, Japan, Germany, South Korea, France, the Netherlands, what do they tell us about why overt patriotism might be less common?
Well, history seems absolutely massive, especially negative or complex history.
Definitely. It fosters that skepticism towards nationalism. And we see how certain values like individualism, cultural modesty, critical thinking can sort of de-emphasize that collective national identity.
In favor of personal identity or civic identity or even global identity.
Right. And in many cases, the focus shifts. It moves away from pride in the state or its symbols and more towards pride in values or culture or systems.
It really highlights that national feeling isn't just one thing, is it? It's so deeply tied up with a nation's specific journey, its values, how it sees itself.
And how its citizens relate to authority and community. It's this really complex mix of history, culture, and individual viewpoints.
So we've heard about these different ends of the spectrum. Countries where national pride is expressed very overtly, often linked to history, symbols, external factors.
Yeah.
And countries where it's maybe more subtle, complicated by history, cultural norms, or focused on different kinds of pride. What stands out to you listening to this?
Do any of those reasons we discussed resonate with how you see your own country or maybe other countries you know?
It's interesting to think about how these different approaches might play out, how they influence things internally or even internationally.
Yeah, imagine how a country where questioning the state is normal might react to global events differently than one where national unity is the top priority.
It really makes you consider what connecting to your nation actually means in different places.
Definitely.
So to wrap up, we've taken this deep dive into the global picture of national pride using these big surveys as our guide.
And we've seen this fascinating spectrum, haven't we?
Yeah, from countries where that feeling is often intense, tied closely to identity, history, external stuff,
To those where it's more subtle, maybe complex or expressed differently, focusing on civic values or cultural success instead of just national symbols.
it's really clear that patriotism isn't some single, simple concept.
Not at all. It's profoundly shaped by unique histories, cultural habits of expression, the politics of the moment.
And that key takeaway. Lower overt pride doesn't mean less connection.
Absolutely not. It often reflects different priorities, individualism, maybe globalism, lessons learned from history, or pride in democratic values.
It just broadens our understanding of all the ways people can feel about the place they call home.
Hmm.
And here's maybe a final thought where it gets really interesting. Given all this diversity in how national pride is felt and shown, from waving flags to valuing institutions, what does national pride truly mean today in our super interconnected world?
Does a strong sense of national identity always need those big outward displays?
Or are there maybe countless quieter ways people connect with their countries, more personal ways that perhaps these big surveys don't fully capture?
And maybe, how might understanding these really different expressions change how we look at international relations, or cultural differences, or even just how we think about our own sense of belonging in our own nation?
Something to definitely think about long after this deep dive ends.